Grant McCoy stood on his porch at dawn, coffee steaming in his weathered hands. October frost glittered across 5,000 acres of prime Montana cattle land. The autumn sun painted golden streaks across pastures where his herd grazed peacefully. 38 years old, wealthy beyond his younger self's imagination, and completely alone. He'd built this empire through discipline, sweat, and the stubborn refusal to look backward. The grand ranch house behind him stood as monument to his success, fine wood. Glass windows shipped from St. Louis, furniture that cost more than most men earned in a year. Yet every room echoed with silence. A dust cloud caught his attention on the distant road. Unusual for this early hour. Grant squinted against the rising sun, watching as a hired wagon approached his gate. The vehicle moved slowly, deliberately, as if carrying precious cargo. Grant sipped his coffee and waited. Visitors were rare at McCoy Ranch. Most folks knew he preferred solitude, and he'd cultivated that reputation carefully. Whatever business this was, he'd handle it quickly and return to his morning routine. The wagon pulled to a stop at the foot of his porch steps. A woman descended, her travel-worn clothes speaking of a long journey. Dark hair streaked with early silver framed a face that might have been pretty once, before years of hardship had drawn lines around her mouth and eyes. She clutched a weathered envelope against her chest like a shield. She looked up at him with determination that seemed to cost her everything. "Are you Grant McCoy?" Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. "The man who was in Silverado 10 years ago." Grant's stomach tightened inexplicably. "I am—" She mounted the first step, then the second. Her eyes never left his face, searching for something he couldn't name. "I'm Grace Porter." She extended the envelope with fingers that shook. "The woman you married in Silverado 10 years ago. I'm your wife, Mr. McCoy." The coffee cup slipped from Grant's fingers. It shattered on the porch boards, dark liquid spreading like spilled secrets across the wood. The sound echoed in the morning stillness, sharp and final. Grant stared at the woman, this stranger who claimed to be his wife. His ordered world cracked with that porcelain cup. A man's past don't stay buried just because he's stopped digging. His father's words, spoken long ago, rose unbidden in his mind. Grant had thought he'd buried his past deep enough that it would never surface. He'd been wrong. Grant's hands trembled slightly as he spread the marriage certificate across his desk. Morning light streamed through the study windows, illuminating every damning detail. Dark wood paneling and leather chairs surrounded him, the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow. The certificate was yellowed with age but perfectly legible. October 15th, 1875. Silverado, Colorado Territory. His signature stared back at him, unmistakable despite the sloppiness of his younger hand. Beside it, a feminine script, Grace Eleanor Porter. He had no memory of writing those letters. "I don't understand." Grant looked up at the woman sitting across from him. She'd refused refreshment, refused to sit until he'd insisted. Dignity radiated from her despite her worn clothing. "I've no recollection of this." "I know." Grace's voice held no accusation, only weariness. "You were celebrating a cattle sale. 3 days of drinking. The innkeeper told me later. I should have known better than to believe a drunk man's promises." Grant winced at the truth of it. He remembered that cattle drive, the money, the whiskey that followed. But the wedding, nothing. Why come now? The question emerged harsher than he intended. After 10 years, Grace reached into her reticule and withdrew another paper. "You wrote this 3 days after we married, posted it from the trail." Grant took the letter. His handwriting again, steadier than the signature but still recognizably his. "I'll return. Grace. Build us a good life. Wait for me." The words of a young fool making promises he'd forget by the next town. "I waited," Grace said quietly. "Days became weeks. Weeks became years. I worked as a seamstress. Never took another man. I honored vows you'd forgotten before the ink dried." Grant set the letter down. His chest felt tight, as if someone had cinched a rope around his ribs. I waited, she continued, because I believed in the vow I made. But I'm dying of it now. Not from illness, but from wondering if any part of that night was real to you. Grant stared at the marriage certificate, then at this woman who'd given a decade of her life to promises he couldn't recall making. What kind of man forgets his own wedding, he whispered. Out here. A man's word is his bond, even the words he don't remember saying. His father's voice again. Grant was beginning to understand how heavy that bond could be. Evening shadows crept across the study as Grant paced before the dying fire. In the guest room upstairs, Grace Porter, his wife, legally speaking, prepared for bed in his house. The absurdity of the situation would have been laughable if it weren't so damning. His housekeeper, Ruth Winslow, appeared in the doorway. She'd worked for him 8 years, mothered him when he'd allow it, and saw more than he liked. Brought you brandy. She set the glass on his desk. Thought you might need it. What I need are answers. Grant stopped pacing. My lawyer could contest this. I was drunk, unable to consent. He'd find a way. He likely could. Ruth's weathered face remained neutral. Question is whether you want him to. What I want is my life back the way it was yesterday morning. Ruth settled into the chair Grace had occupied hours earlier. And how was that life? Grant, this big house, all these fine things. Nobody to share them with. Grant resumed pacing. I've done well for myself. Done well at being alone, Ruth corrected gently. What kind of man are you now? That's what matters. Not what kind of man you were in Silverado. She left him with his brandy and his thoughts. Grant moved to the window, staring at his reflection in the darkened glass. He saw the ghost of his younger self reckless, drunk, making vows he'd abandon. He'd spent 10 years burying that man, built an empire on his grave. But the past wasn't dead. It waited in Silverado with a weathered certificate and a woman's faithful heart. Memory surfaced unbidden his father's deathbed. The old man's grip surprisingly strong. The land don't lie, neither should a man. His father had died with debts, had lost the original family ranch, but he'd died honest. Could Grant say the same? He could send Grace away with money, contest the marriage, protect his reputation. That would be the pragmatic choice, the successful rancher's choice. But it wouldn't be the honest man's choice. Grant made his decision before he fully understood its weight. Morning found him at the breakfast table when Grace descended, her carpet bag in hand. I should leave, she said. I came seeking answers, not to burden you. Sit down. Grant gestured to the chair beside him. You're legally my wife. I won't contest it. Stay while we figure this out together. Grace's eyes filled with tears, not joy, but exhausted relief. She set down her bag. Thank you. Outside, autumn wind stripped golden leaves from the cottonwoods. Grant watched them fall. Everything I thought I was is being stripped away. What remains he supposed he'd find out. 1 week passed, then another. Grace and Grant inhabited the same house like strangers sharing a train car, polite, careful, maintaining distance. Grant stood at his study window, watching Grace kneel in the neglected kitchen garden. Late October sun warmed her back as she worked the soil with practiced hands. She'd insisted on earning her keep, and Ruth had gladly surrendered the garden to her care. She's good with growing things, Ruth observed, appearing beside him with his afternoon coffee. Garden hasn't looked this tended in years. Grant accepted the cup. She's a hard worker. She's more than that, and you know it. Ruth's tone brooked no argument. House feels different with her here, less like a mausoleum. Grant said nothing, but he'd noticed. The echo in the hallways seemed softer. Meals were conversations now rather than silent necessities. Grace had a way of drawing out stories, asking questions that made him think. But the town had noticed too. Boone Carter, his foreman, reported the gossip after the supply run. Folks are talking, boss. Millionaire bachelor suddenly has a wife nobody knew about. Some think it's romantic. Others? He trailed off. Others what? Question her legitimacy, her motives. Boone shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Henderson's leading that charge. Grant's jaw tightened. He knew Emma Henderson, bank president's wife, arbiter of social acceptability, sharp-tongued beneath her Sunday smiles. Grace returned from her own supply trip that afternoon. Face pale despite the wind's chill. Grant saw the hurt in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. What happened? Nothing. She wouldn't meet his gaze. Just gossip. I'm accustomed to it. Grace. She finally looked at him. Mrs. Henderson made certain I understood my convenient timing. Remembering a husband only after he's become wealthy. Grant's fists clenched. She said that, not directly. She's too clever for that. But the meaning was clear. Gossip travels faster than lightning and burns twice as long, another of his father's sayings, proven true. That evening, Grace approached him in the study. I've brought shame to your name, she said softly. That wasn't my intention. Grant rose from his chair. You've brought truth to it. There's a difference. Is there? The town sees a woman who waited conveniently long. The town doesn't know you. The words came fierce and sudden. They don't know you waited 10 years on a drunk man's promise. That's not convenience. That's faithfulness most folks can't imagine. Grace's eyes widened at his vehemence. My lawyer suggested the marriage might be contestable. Grant continued. I was intoxicated, unable to give true consent. And what did you tell him? I told him no. Grant met her gaze. You waited 10 years on my word. What's my reputation worth if it's built on dishonoring that? Grace's hand rose to her throat. Grant. It was the first time she'd used his given name. We'll weather the gossip, he said. Together? She nodded, unable to speak. Outside. Rain began to fall, cold autumn rain that would soon turn to snow. But in the study, something warm had taken root. 3 weeks in, Grant found Grace in the parlor examining old family photographs. November chill crept through the windows despite the fire's warmth. She held a daguerreotype of him as a young man, reckless smile, eyes bright with dreams. This is the man I married, Grace said without looking up. Where did he go? Grant sat beside her on the settee, close enough to see the photograph clearly, close enough to smell the lavender soap she used. He grew up? Finally. Tell me about him, about you. Grant rarely spoke of his past, but something about Grace's quiet patience drew words from him like water from a deep well. My father died when I was 25. Left debts I couldn't imagine. Ranch mortgaged beyond saving. I sold everything. Took to the trail. He paused. Spent 2 years drowning grief in whiskey and cattle drives. Silverado was the lowest point. And apparently, our wedding night, Grant rubbed his jaw. I don't remember the ceremony, but I remember the feeling. Wanting to belong to someone. Wanting family. I was lost. Grace. She set the photograph aside. I saw that in you, even drunk as you were. Saw the wounded man beneath the bravado. When you proposed, I believed you meant it. You were a minister's daughter. Why would you marry a drunk stranger? Grace's smile held old sadness. My father taught me to see the best in people. Perhaps I saw too much that wasn't there. No. Grant's voice was firm. You saw what was there. I just couldn't find it again until now. Silence stretched between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Grace, there's something I should know. He hesitated. Are you in any trouble, financial trouble? Her face colored. My sister. She's ill, needs money for a doctor. I have savings, but not enough. And why didn't you say, I didn't come here seeking charity, Grant, I came seeking truth? He stood abruptly. You're my wife. Your family is my family. I'll send money tomorrow. Grant, you don't have to. I want to. He turned to face her. Let me help. Please. Grace's eyes glistened. You're not the man I expected to find. I'm not the man I expected to be, either. Even late-planted seeds can bear fruit, if tended with care. The grandfather clock chimed midnight. They'd talked for hours without noticing. Grant realized with surprise that for the first time in years, his house felt less empty. Something fragile was growing between them. Delicate as the late-season flowers Grace tended in the garden. Grant couldn't name it yet, but he found himself wanting to protect it. As they said goodnight at the foot of the stairs, Grace paused. Thank you, Grant, for believing me. For not sending me away? Thank you for coming, he replied. I needed to know the truth about myself, even if I didn't realize it. She smiled genuine, warm, and ascended the stairs. Grant returned to the parlor, staring at his young photograph. The reckless boy, the grieving son, the drunken Silverado. He'd spent a decade running from all of them. Perhaps it was time to stop running. Sunday morning dawned cold and clear. Grant and Grace climbed into the wagon for the ride to church, their first public appearance together. Grace wore her best dress, modest and dignified. Grant sat beside her, protective but trying not to be possessive. His stomach churned with unusual anxiety. He'd faced down rustlers, survived blizzards, negotiated with hardened bankers. But social judgment was different, quieter, more insidious. The church fell silent as they entered. Every head turned, every eye measured. Grace walked with her chin high, and Grant felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Pastor Whitlock welcomed them warmly from the pulpit. Good to see you both this fine morning. But after the service, the congregation's true feelings emerged. Mrs. Henderson approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. McCoy. She emphasized the name. How fortunate you remembered your husband's existence. 10 years is quite a time to wait. Isn't it, though? I suppose patience has its rewards when the husband becomes wealthy. Grant stepped forward, anger flashing hot, but Grace's hand touched his arm. I waited because I believed in the vow I made, Grace said quietly. Perhaps that's difficult to understand. Mrs. Henderson. Emma Henderson's smile turned brittle. Perhaps. She swept away, leaving whispered conversation in her wake. The ride home was silent. Grant's jaw ached from clenching. Grace stared at the passing landscape, her profile unreadable. That evening, he found her in the guest room, packing. What are you doing? Grant's heart seized unexpectedly. I should leave. Grace folded a blouse with careful precision, not meeting his eyes. I came seeking closure, not to destroy your standing. You've been kind, but I won't be the scandal that ruins everything you've built. Grace, the town will never accept me, and you'll suffer for it. Grant moved toward her. I don't care about... She swayed suddenly, hand gripping the bedpost. Her face had gone chalk white. Grace. She collapsed. Grant caught her before she hit the floor. She weighed almost nothing in his arms. When had she become so thin he carried her to the bed, shouting for Ruth. Fetch the doctor now. Coffee's weak, but it's honest like most folks ought to be. His father's saying, but all Grant could think was how pale Grace looked, how fragile. Ruth sent a ranch hand racing for town. The doctor arrived within the hour. Grant paced outside Grace's door while the examination proceeded. When the doctor emerged, his expression was grave. Pneumonia. Serious, but not beyond hope. She's exhausted, malnourished, years of poor care catching up. He set his bag down. She needs rest, warmth, careful nursing. Next few days are critical. Will she survive? The doctor's pause answered more than his words. This could go either way. Grant entered her room. Grace lay against white pillows. Her breathing labored, her face flushed with fever. The carpetbag sat packed by the door, mocking him. He pulled a chair beside her bed. "I won't let you leave," he whispered, though she couldn't hear. "Not like this." As he sat vigil, Grant realized with startling clarity that he didn't want her to leave at all. Not because of duty or honor or reputation, because somewhere in these weeks, Grace Porter had become essential to him. The marriage certificate meant nothing now. What mattered was the woman who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Outside, the first November frost descended, killing the last flowers. But inside, lamplight burned steady, a beacon against the cold. 3 days of fever. Grant barely left Grace's bedside. Ruth brought broth and fresh linens. Boone managed the ranch. The millionaire's empire ran itself while its master tended his forgotten wife. Night and day blurred together. Grant slept in the chair when exhaustion claimed him, woke to check her breathing, prayed the fever would break. Third night, it peaked. Grace thrashed weakly, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Her skin burned hot enough to singe his palm. Grant knelt beside her bed, something he hadn't done since childhood prayers. "I've wasted 10 years building an empire of land and cattle." He confessed to her unconscious form. "Built it to prove I wasn't the reckless fool who lost his father's ranch. But what's it worth? Grace, what's any of it worth without someone to share it?" She moaned, turning her head. "I was running from my past. You were waiting in it. Faithful where I was faithless." His voice broke. "I don't deserve you. Never did. But I'll spend whatever time we have trying to—" Memory surfaced his father's final words. "Legacy ain't land. Son, it's the love you leave behind." Grant finally understood. His father hadn't been ashamed of losing the ranch. He'd grieved leaving his son alone in the world. "I've been alone so long," Grant whispered to Grace. "Don't leave me alone again." Dawn broke gray and cold. Grant jerked awake from fitful sleep to find Grace's eyes open, watching him. "You're still here," she breathed, her voice a thread. "I'm not going anywhere." He took her hand. "And neither are you." Her fingers tightened weakly in his. The fever had broken. Ruth brought broth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Thank the Lord. As Grace's strength returned over the following days, Grant made his decision. He would not simply honor the marriage legally. He would honor it truly. Court his own wife. Earn her love properly. He began simply bringing books from town because he'd learned she loved reading. Reading poetry aloud while she recovered. Writing Grace's sister himself. Introducing himself properly as her husband. Ensuring funds reached the doctor. Grace watched his transformation with cautious hope. "You don't owe me courtship," she said one evening as he brought her tea. "The marriage is already legal." But it wasn't right. Grant set down the cup. "Let me make it right." She studied his face for a long moment. "You've changed. I'm becoming the man you thought you married." Finally, Mercy arrives quiet, like first snow. Outside, the first real snow of winter fell, blanketing the ranch in white, clean slate. New beginning. Ruth Winslow observed them together and smiled. "House finally feels like a home," she told Boone. The foreman nodded. "Man finally looks like he belongs in his own life." December arrived. Grace had recovered fully, roses returning to her cheeks. The household had transformed, laughter echoed in hallways that knew only silence. Grant and Grace took meals together, planned spring gardens, discussed books by the fire. But the town situation festered. Grant learned that Mrs. Henderson was organizing a petition to the church board, questioning whether Pastor Whitlock should have welcomed that woman into their congregation. "Let them petition," Grace said when he told her. "I won't be driven away by gossip." But Grant had reached his limit with cowardice, his own and others. He visited Pastor Whitlock privately. "I want to address the congregation. Tell them the truth. All of it." The pastor listened as Grant explained everything: the drinking, the forgotten marriage, Grace's faithful waiting. "What would you have me do?" Whitlock asked. "Let me speak. Let them judge with truth rather than gossip." Sunday arrived. The church filled, curiosity buzzing. Word had spread that Grant McCoy would make an announcement. Grace sat in the front pew, her face calm despite her trembling hands. Grant had told her nothing of his plan, only asked her to trust him. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is stand still and speak truth. Grant stood before the congregation. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. 10 years ago, I was a drunk and a fool." Gasps rippled through the pews. "I married this woman in Silverado, made her promises I didn't remember come morning, and abandoned her without a backward glance." The murmuring intensified. Grant pressed on. "She waited 10 years on my word. Working as a seamstress, never taking another man, honoring vows I'd forgotten before the ink dried." He paused. "She could have divorced me, remarried, forgotten me as I forgot her. Instead, she honored a vow made to a man who didn't deserve it." He turned to face Grace directly. "That's not scandal. Folks, that's Grace. And I don't mean her name." Grace's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming. "I wronged this woman in ways I can never fully repair. But before God and this community, I ask—" Grant's voice thickened. "Will you marry me again properly this time, sober and true, with full knowledge of who I am and who I want to become your husband, worthy of the faith you've shown?" Grace rose, tears falling freely. "I will." Pastor Whitlock stepped forward. "Then let us witness this renewal of vows." The ceremony took 5 minutes. Grant spoke every word clearly, firmly, eyes never leaving Grace's face. This time, he would remember, after. Something remarkable happened. Mrs. Henderson approached Grace and apologized. "I judged wrongly," she said stiffly. "Forgive me." Others followed. The story of faithfulness and honor had touched even hard hearts. Ruth wiped her eyes in the back pew. Boone cleared his throat roughly as they left the church. Grace squeezed Grant's hand. "You remembered your vows this time." Grant smiled. "Every word, and I'll remember them every day forward." 3 months later, early March, snow melted from pastures, revealing earth ready for planting. Green shoots pushed through dark soil where Grace had planted bulbs in autumn. Grant knelt beside his wife in the expanded kitchen garden. His hands, more accustomed to ledgers and reins, worked the soil alongside hers. For the first time since boyhood, he felt the earth's promise beneath his fingers. "Rows need to run east-west," Grace instructed, her voice warm with amusement. "Catches more, son." "Yes, ma'am." Grant adjusted the string marking his row. "Anything else I'm doing wrong?" "Only everything." But she smiled. "You're learning?" Their marriage had blossomed into genuine love over these winter months. Not the desperate impulse of his youth, but something steadier. Two people who'd chosen each other with clear eyes and full hearts. Grace's sister had recovered and planned a summer visit. The town had embraced them fully now. Grace taught Sunday school. Grant served on the school board. Their story had become local legend, proof that redemption was possible, faithfulness rewarded. Love could arrive even when hope had nearly died. Grant paused his planting, watching Grace work. She'd gained weight, color. Her dark hair caught morning sun. The silver threads no longer speaking of hardship, but of wisdom earned. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching him staring. "That my father was right." "About what legacy isn't land." Grant sat back on his heels. "It's the love you leave behind." Grace set down her trowel. "And what love will we leave?" Grant considered. The ranch would prosper, but that mattered less now. What mattered was the community they'd helped build, the example they'd set. Mercy over judgment. Faithfulness over convenience. Second chances over easy condemnation. The kind that waited 10 years on a promise, he said finally. The kind that honors vows even when they're forgotten. The kind that believes mercy is always possible. Grace moved closer. That's a fine legacy, Mr. McCoy. That it is. Mrs. McCoy. They finished planting as the sun climbed higher. Ruth called them for breakfast biscuits, eggs, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The house rang with conversation and laughter. After eating, Grant and Grace stood on the porch together, coffee cups warming their hands. Dawn light painted the ranch in gold and green colors of new growth. New beginnings. The grandfather clock chimed 6 times inside the house. Time moving forward. No longer haunted by forgotten past. Cottonwood trees showed first buds. In the kitchen garden, seeds planted in autumn late but not too late pushed through thawing soil toward the sun. Grace leaned against Grant's shoulder. We made it. We did. He kissed her hair. Together. Home ain't a place. It's the people you'd ride through hell to get back to. Grant finally understood that saying, his father had known. Grace had known all along. Home wasn't this grand house or these 5,000 acres. Home was the woman beside him, the family they'd build, the life they'd create together. Every storm ends with sunrise. Every forgotten vow can be redeemed. And love, no matter how late, still finds its way home.